Argentina has defaulted on its debt 9 times. Last year, the US Treasury sent it $20 billion anyway, and called it a strategic investment, not a bailout. This isn't a rescue story. It's the first life test of a doctrine with a 200-year-old name. You've probably never heard the name, and that's exactly the point. Here's the simplest way to understand what's actually happening. Think of the Monroe Doctrine as an insurance policy the United States wrote on its own hemisphere 200 years ago, where the terms were simple. This half of the map is covered, everyone else, stay out. For most of the last 2 centuries, almost nobody read the fine print. Nobody needed to. No one was actually filing a claim. In 1823, President James Monroe told the empires of Europe that any new colonization in the Americas would be treated as a hostile act against the United States. It wasn't really a law, it was a warning, backed at the time by a navy that couldn't have enforced it if anyone even called the bluff. In 1904, Theodore Roosevelt added the first update. What's still referred to as the Roosevelt Corollary said the US wouldn't just keep other empires out, it would step in directly whenever it judged a Latin American government too unstable to be trusted on its own. In December of 2025, the Trump administration published the second update in 200 years. And before we get into what that update actually says, if this is the kind of system you want broken down, be sure to hit the like and then subscribe. We publish multiple times a week. It's called the National Security Strategy. Released the first week of December, there was 30 pages, not the 20 you might have heard of. Here's the line straight from the document. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. The administration gave it a name that tells you exactly what it is: the Trump Corollary. Translation? The hemisphere belongs to Washington again. China and Russia are the empires this time. And the enforcement tool isn't a warship, it's a balance sheet. Argentina is the proof of concept. In October 2025, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced a $20 billion currency swap line with Argentina's central bank. The money came from something called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, a treasury tool the US has used to rescue a foreign government exactly once before this century, $1.5 billion to Uruguay in 2002. This was 13 times larger. Bessent didn't call it charity. A strong, stable Argentina, which helps anchor a prosperous Western Hemisphere, is in the strategic interest of the United States. President Milei described the mechanism almost clinically. We have a credit for $20 billion. It only activates when needed. By January, Argentina had drawn $2.5 billion from the line and paid every cent back within weeks. That's what a strategic backstop is supposed to do: sit there fully loaded and never actually get fired. Then in February, the two governments signed something bigger, a critical minerals framework, reportedly worth up to $130 billion, opening Argentina's lithium and copper to American financing, American processing, and American supply chains. Argentina sits on roughly a fifth of the world's known lithium reserves, access to Exim Bank, access to the US Development Finance Corporation, the same kind of government backing that's already popping up rare earth supply chains on the other side of the planet. If you hold an index fund, some of that financing is probably already running through mining companies sitting quietly inside your portfolio. Currency line, mineral deal, same 18 months. Same doctrine, same playbook, just a different hemisphere. Because a strategy on paper is only a strategy, what makes a doctrine real is what happens the moment a government in the region doesn't fall in line. And now, Venezuela. In January 2026, the same national security strategy that authorized the Argentina relationship was cited to justify something the hemisphere hadn't seen in decades: a US operation that captured Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro and brought him to New York to face trial. 2 countries, 2 completely different tools, 1 document connecting both of them. The swap line is what the Trump Corollary looks like when a government cooperates. Venezuela is what it looks like when one doesn't. Argentina and Venezuela are the 2 ends of the spectrum: cooperate and get rewarded, refused and get removed. But the doctrine doesn't only come in those 2 flavors. The rest of the map is where it actually gets interesting. Start with Panama. In January 2025, Trump said this about the canal: "China is operating the Panama Canal, and we're taking it back." The canal itself was never Chinese, but since 1997, a Hong Kong company called CK Hutchison has run the two ports that booked it: Balboa on the Pacific side and Cristobal on the Atlantic. That canal handles roughly 40% of all US container traffic every year. A year of pressure later, in January of 2026, Panama's own Supreme Court ruled the company's port contracts unconstitutional, citing irregularities an audit found cost the country over $1 billion. No invasion, no swap line, just a court ruling and a Chinese-linked operator that lost its ports. That's the third tool in the kit: Lawfare instead of gunboats or bailouts. Then Colombia. When President Petro didn't fall in line on drug policy, Washington decertified the country and sanctioned Petro personally, a step usually reserved for adversaries, not allies. By January, both sides had backed down. Petro recommitted to fumigation and extradition. Washington eased off. That's the middle setting: pressure, but not removal. Then Peru, the one place on the map where the doctrine has not won yet. In 2024, China's state shipping company opened a $3.5 billion megaport in Chancay on Peru's Pacific coast. It cuts shipping time between South America and Shanghai by 10 days. Brazil, Chile, and Ecuador are all now eyeing the same port as their own gateway to Asia, bypassing the Panama Canal, bypassing the US entirely. No court ruling has touched it, and no swap line competes with it. The two countries aren't waiting to be pushed at all. Paraguay is the only country left in South America that still recognizes Taiwan over Beijing, and has for decades, with no American pressure required. Brazil, however, is the opposite case. The largest holdout of all, hosting BRICS summits and deepening trade with China even as Washington leans on almost everyone else in the hemisphere. Here's the number that ties the whole map together. China is now the largest trading partner of nearly every country in South America. Not the region in general, nearly every individual government within it, with one exception, does more trade with Beijing than with Washington. $20 billion to Argentina, a court ruling in Panama, sanctions on Colombia. None of that undoes that math, and it isn't supposed to. It's proof that alignment gets rewarded and resistance gets pressured, and every finance minister from Lima to Bogota is still running the calculation. But scale isn't the same as certainty. The bet is already showing cracks in exactly the country it's supposed to prove out. Since the swap line was announced, Milei's own approval rating has fallen from the high 40s into the mid-30s, pulled down by corruption allegations, rising unemployment, and Argentina's souring on the American relationship itself. Support for the trade agreement itself has dropped from nearly 60% a year ago to just 41% now. And in Washington, the questions haven't stopped either. Senator Elizabeth Warren has formally asked the Treasury to explain why a fund built for short-term emergencies is still parked inside a foreign central bank more than a year after it was supposed to be temporary. So here's the honest version of where this stands. The Trump Corollary is a document backed by a real deal, already tested once against a real crisis in Venezuela. What it hasn't proven yet is whether it can survive the one variable no strategy paper controls. Whether the government you bet on stays popular enough to keep governing. Here's why this reaches you, even if you've never thought about Argentina before this video. If this model works, swap lines instead of foreign aid, mineral deals instead of new military bases, and financial capture instead of invasion, it becomes the default American playbook for holding this hemisphere against China for the next decade. That decides which government gets access to capital, which supply chains get built on whose terms, and which companies end up owning the lithium and copper this century actually runs on. This was never a bailout story. It's a 200-year-old doctrine running its first live test in the open, and the variable to watch from here isn't Washington. It's whether Buenos Aires can hold together long enough to prove the bet was right. If this helped the picture click, that's a like. And if you want the next one on your feed, be sure to subscribe. We publish multiple times a week.